Hey everyone, welcome today. My name is Burkett. If you're tuning in, then you probably already know that modernizing a dealership's technology stack can be most equal as exciting and painful. I spend most of my time and most of my days working with dealership groups on exactly that, figuring out where the gaps are, what's worth investing in, and what's just noise. Lately, a lot of the areas keep coming back to communication because honestly, what's more overlooked than communication? It's really the lifeline of the business, right? So you can have a great CRM, slick DNS or slick DMS, sorry, all of it, and still lose customers in that space between a missed call, miscommunication text, unanswered text, you name it, right? So when I started seeing what GoTo was specifically doing for automotive, I really wanted to dig in. Not a sales pitch, not a product demo, just a real conversation about what's working, what we've seen, what's broken, and really what's helping dealerships go to the next level. So I reached out to David, who leads their automotive practice, and said, "Hey, let's have some Q&A. Let's talk through this." David, I don't know, you want to introduce yourself here?
Yeah, happy to. Blake, it's great to be with you. Thanks so much for reaching out to schedule this. And excited to talk, broadly about the challenges that we're seeing in automotive. We've been in this industry for over a decade now, and it's something that's very important to us is understanding what are the challenges that are keeping, dealer principals, GMs, service managers up at night when it comes to the customer experience.
Exactly. Well, really to start off the questions, one, how did you end up specializing in communications for the automotive space specifically? And then was that intentional or did you guys kind of just fall into that?
Yeah, so it actually, interestingly enough, a little bit of both, right? So
Yeah.
I've been in the industry for about 10 years. GoTo has been focused on automotive for about 11, right? So just right before I joined. And, we kind of were experimenting, right? We were looking at different industries, trying to understand, where are really the hot, biggest challenges when it comes to communication and helping to solve those for our clients. And automotive really stood out, right? As we started to do our industry research and understand some of these challenges to a really deep degree. So, what makes automotive so unique, right? And the answer to that is it's a industry that requires a lot of mobility, right? So you've got everyone knows the best salespeople are not sitting at their desk waiting for the phone to ring, and so they need a mobile first solution. It's also a very high turnover industry, right? You've got a lot of customers that are working with individuals that may or may not be with the dealership the next day or the next week. And so centralized communication really matters in that context. And it's also an industry that's highly driven by data, right? So the more data that we can understand from a marketing attribution perspective, from a customer experience perspective, the deal velocity of selling a vehicle today is night and day, right? It's completely changed ever since COVID, right? This age of convenience that we're working in today, where customers can buy a vehicle, almost with the click of a button. That's what these automotive dealerships, and of course our audience listening today are dealing with. So you have to be available. Speed to lead is paramount, and the experience you're delivering to your customers really matters. So with all of that context, we understood, right? Our leadership team said, here is an industry where there's some complex challenges. It's not going to be easy, but if we can design our system around the needs of these dealerships, we may have something that's going to be really powerful.
Right. No, yeah, no, I completely agree. The way of communicating with your clients is forever changing, right? In all industries, but specifically the dealership industry, right? Communication is number one. How are you communicating with your clients? How are you getting them through the door? Because, like you said, it can change so fast. You can buy a car with a click of a button these days. But with all those changes, coming into effect, what does a typical week look like for you? Are you mostly in the weeds with customers, or more on the strategy side? What does that look like today?
Yeah, I would say it's a mix of kind of all of the above, right? I think it's important here at GoTo, kind of our, one of our core philosophies is we don't build our products in an ivory tower. Okay, so while it's important to kind of have, this grassroots approach in communicating, feature requests and integration enhancements and different things that we're doing to improve the experience for our automotive dealership partners. It's important to get that direct exposure as well. So, I'm spending time, talking about kind of overall strategy from a product development perspective and kind of dealership feedback, and I'm gathering that feedback directly from our conversations with dealer partners, both that are evaluating us and that are already on the platform, which is about 4,500 today. So we've got a significant footprint in the dealership space, and certainly something that we have a good pulse on, right? Kind of what matters to these dealerships.
Yeah, I mean, here at OneSource, obviously, we're seeing that firsthand, right? With many of our clients moving over to GoTo in the dealership industry, and what we're seeing, what it's doing for the client, right? So, based off that, right, what it's doing for the client, what would you say is the most surprising thing that you've learned, about how dealerships operate day to day, that jumped out to you the most? And
I would
might be tough to narrow that one down.
Sure. Yeah, no, it is very situational, right? But there are definitely some common themes, right? And some patterns that we've noticed working within this industry as long as we have. And I would say that, primarily it's the level of controlled chaos is kind of the way that I like to think about it, right? In the automotive space and inside of the dealership itself. Okay. So, the technology fragmentation and communication fragmentation is not exclusive to the dealership to the customer. Sometimes there's interdepartmental communication that can be challenging just because the systems that are in place don't necessarily support it all that well. And it's really been surprising and frankly impressive, right, to see the most successful dealerships in the world that we'll go and visit, and just how they take that kind of controlled chaos behind the scenes, and the showroom is still immaculate, right? And the customer experience, despite some of these challenges, really it's still shines through. So it's been really impressive to see that, and it's also been very rewarding to be involved in helping to kind of alleviate some of those challenges that our dealer partners are experiencing.
Right. Well, and I think that leads us into, you mentioned a lot of larger dealership groups all the way down to, your local ones. Obviously communication, like we're talking about today, is everything for these groups, no matter big nor small. What made GoTo specifically realize that communication was a bigger problem than people thought?
Yeah, so I think we started noticing, right, dealerships are actually, very interested in technology. I don't think that's any surprise to anyone. They're kind of on the bleeding edge, actually, and very progressive when it comes to putting their customer first and how can we really optimize for that customer experience and using technology to do that. So we started noticing the dealerships were investing in CRMs and DMSs and call tracking solutions and texting platforms and kind of all of this kind of, these different systems to put together, again, that really compelling customer experience. But often the kind of fundamental communication layer was overlooked. And sometimes that fundamental communication layer is referred to as the phone system, right? And a lot of times that phone system is just kind of a cup and string, right? There's not much to it. Customer calls, the dealership answers. But what we found in our conversations with dealerships is that communication layer can become the connective tissue, right, between all of your different ecosystem and technology stack in the dealership. That can tie all of those pieces together, and it solves a really prominent challenge in the automotive space, which is understanding the true customer experience. So from the time a customer calls you or texts you or sends you a message on your website, or even, schedules a meeting online, right? How do we tie all of those interactions into a single pane of glass so that if the general manager gets involved with the customer to see why did they buy or why didn't they buy, we can really understand the entire roadmap of how that customer contacted us, who they spoke with, how many times they were called back, if they left us any voicemails. There's no single place for dealership executives to really understand that information. And so that's where we kind of identified, right? This is really an important problem that we can solve to really help dealerships make communications technology a competitive advantage.
Yeah, and I think that's a prime example as to, single pane of glass. I know sometimes that term can be overused, right? But it's true. I mean, the way you're communicating with clients isn't just picking up a phone anymore. Although that is very important, texting to online to all these different ways you can communicate with dealerships. If you're not communicating properly and in a efficient manner, that person can go to any number of dealerships around, or like you said, you can click of a button, you could get one out of your state. So it's so easy to go on to the next one. So communication is key.
Yeah.
Not only moving forward, but just in general, right?
Yeah, and in our research, right, and just to kind of follow up on that point, Blake, because it's an important one, customers are willing to pay more for convenience. Okay, and I think a perfect example of that is DoorDash. Okay, right. So we've all ordered DoorDash, right? So, some more than others, right? But I think that the fundamental point there is, you know, when a customer has a need and they know what they want, and you need to be there to serve that need, right? And in the way that the customer wants. So whether that's through a web chat or through a text message or through a phone call, right? Meeting your customer where they are is more important than ever, and helping customers to to empower them to create that buying experience that really delights is just so important, right? I think DoorDash could probably collect even more if they had an option to kind of drop the food in your mouth instead of on the door, right? So but I think that's just a good example, right? If a dealership is looking to improve margins, automate appointment scheduling, and make the buying experience exceptional, uh, utilizing technology to meet customers where they are and improve that convenience factor is going to increase average sales price. It's going to increase your customer loyalty.
For sure. Yeah. Improving the experience for clients at the end of the day has always been goal one for a lot of industries, and even more so in the dealership industry itself. But now that we know, where GoTo is coming from, where they've been, where they're going, let's dive in a little bit more into what the dealerships are seeing on an everyday basis and what would be relevant to our viewers, right? So what are the biggest communication breakdowns that you're seeing in dealership today and dealership auto groups today, as well as where are they bleeding the most time and wasting the most money without realizing it?
Yeah, this is maybe the most important question of our session today, right? So let's spend some time to break it down.
I wanted to start at the most important, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Let's get these answers out there.
Yeah. So we're going right to the secret sauce. So I think that the most important metric, right, that dealerships should be looking at is missed interactions and mishandled interactions. Okay, so important distinction there. Something that we have spent a lot of time trying to understand and trying to highlight to our dealership partners, right? So just to define those, a missed call, as the name implies, is a customer leaves us a voicemail. Customer hangs up before they reach anybody in the dealership, right? So pretty straightforward. You would be surprised that there's actually, again, at no fault to the dealership, but there's a lot of systems out there that actually won't provide you with that simple metric, right? How many customers today, as a percentage and as a quantity, tried to contact us and were unsuccessful? So that's first. Mishandled interactions are becoming more and more important, right? I think a lot of the dealerships have the blocking and tackling down, right? They're picking up the phone when customers call them, but maybe they're not getting the right person. Okay. And that's where this integration between the communication system, that connective tissue layer, and the nervous system of the dealership, the CRM and DMS, really makes an impact. So you're able to essentially get the customer ear to ear with the right person without talking to a receptionist, without talking to the wrong department, without calling into sales because service is really hard to get a hold of. right? Because service advisors are working with the customer in front of them. They're working through ROs. They're looking at vehicles. They've got a lot on their plate, right? So those mishandled interactions are another data point that we're really, you know, very interested in number one, seeing with our dealership partners, and how do we solve those? And then kind of alongside those, if we think about this from a crawl, walk, run perspective, that's kind of phase one, is
Mm-hmm.
how do we kind of staunch some of the bleeding, some of the easy fixes, just because the data hasn't been available. It's been a big black box, so we haven't really been able to. You can't improve what you don't measure. So kind of the next evolution of that is how do we implement omni-channel communications to increase the number of self-service appointment bookings in the service bay, or how do we get more customers engaged through social media, website, right? And some of those areas where we're able to come in and really empower that digital first experience that customers expect is how we can, again, revolutionize this. The conversations we're having with dealerships, are transformational, not transactional. We really
Right.
want to focus on, how can we take this technology and really help that dealership sell and service more cars, move more metal. At the end of the day, that's really what matters. There's a number of ways that we do that, but those are some of the focus points that we have as a business.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point with from a service aspect to a sales aspect to just an all around customer experience aspect. It's how are we streamlining that for the client, right? How are we streamlining it to make it easy for the client coming through the door? And at the end of the day, trying to solve for that issue instead of selling you a product or selling you a voice platform, right? So I think all encompassing, bringing all those communications together is key. But alongside, I would say, of communication breakdowns, right? So how much is a slow or inconsistent response, that the dealership is giving a client in sales or service? How are you seeing the retention of that, or are dealerships even tracking that at this point?
Yeah, most of the dealerships that we're working with, they are tracking that, right? They're very sophisticated in the data that
Mm-hmm.
at least they have access to, right? And sometimes the fundamental systems that are in place don't provide that data. But a lot of the dealerships that we're working with are at least aware, right, through maybe a third-party application or something that's providing some level of analytics to them. But it's extremely costly, right? If you think about the lifetime value of a vehicle sale, you're not just talking about the upfront sale. Of course, there's financing. Of course, there's the fixed ops side, right? Where's that customer going to go for all of their maintenance moving forward? They have a relationship with you. You're providing an excellent customer experience to them, and you can market parts and service to them over the lifetime of that vehicle, right? And then, of course, sell them another vehicle down the road. So the lifetime value of a customer relationship in the automotive space, this is not a secret, is very, very high. So one missed interaction or a slow or inconsistent response, to your point, is extremely costly, right? And we kind of alluded to this earlier in the conversation, but the average car buyer today is making a purchasing decision within 5 days. So if it's taking you 48 hours to call somebody after they sign up for information on AutoTrader or Cars.com, sorry, you may have already lost, right? So
Mm-hmm.
having that seamless integration between managing your leads effectively and having transparency and accountability across the dealership, that we have certain SLAs, we have outreach that is programmatic in these situations to make sure that when customers submit information that they're interested in talking to us, that they know it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when they hear from us, and that it's quick to meet the customers where they are and to deliver that exceptional customer experience. Right. A lot of these dealerships think of themselves as hospitality companies that happen to sell
Right.
vehicles. Right. And so that's what we're working with, is how do we give the Four Seasons experience to 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 customers that we see every year?
Yeah. Yeah, and that experience is crucial, right? That first impression, like you said, how quickly a sale can go by right in front of you without even being able to respond to it in time, right? So I think that leads us into specifically the customer experience. What is a gap in the customer experience realm, I would say, that most every dealership has, but really they don't want to admit that it's going on.
Yeah, no, it's important, and I think that fundamentally to break it down, kind of in maybe a simple form is dealerships a lot of times, right? No fault of their own, is they think in departments. They think
Hmm.
service and sales and parts. Customers don't think about departments. They think about the dealership. So you need that kind of cohesion across all departments where when a customer calls the dealership, it's like the dealership was expecting them to call, right? Whether that's into the service department, into the sales department, regardless of where they're calling in or how long it's been, you're referencing the last conversation with them. You have a summary of those past phone calls so that you understand the context around that conversation. So to answer your question, I mean, the biggest gap is when customers feel like they're starting over every time that they interact with the new person.
Yeah.
The dealerships that we're working with, that again really see communications and customer experience as a competitive advantage. Uh, they make the communication feel continuous and cohesive, right? Regardless of the individual department that's handling that phone call.
Well, and I think you bring up a good point, right? The familiarity, right, of a client, right? That goes a long way when you pick up the phone and say, hey, it's this person, it's Blake, it's David. Getting that initial feel good experience, right? And so along with that comes integrations, and we all know how specific the applications that dealership industry uses. It's not like you're using your basic Salesforce or HubSpot integrations, right? You're using industry focused applications. So, as we talk about integrating, those applications or those everyday things that dealerships are using or applications, what breaks first when you try to scale communications across multiple locations, right? What breaks first? What are you seeing break down? And what does that look like at scale?
Yeah, yeah. So I think in our experience, right, the consistency is kind of the first domino to fall, right? Because a lot of times frankly it's challenging, right? Your automotive is changing quickly, very quickly, and you've got different dealerships doing different things with different processes. And so standardizing can be really difficult, not only from a technology perspective, but also from a training and implementation and adoption perspective, right? So I think that consistency is paramount, and you know the dealerships that are prioritizing the process and consistency across the rooftops are the ones that we're really seeing the most success. So do we have a standardized approach when it comes to how, when a customer sends in a lead, a phone call, a text message, of how quickly they'll respond, and are we able to track that, right? Leadership should also be able to see performance across each of the rooftops, right? So can you understand, right, if there are green shoots or weak spots in the business, why, right? Fundamentally, how are you kind of comparing your different operations to create a rising tide that lifts all boats? So the goal isn't, of course, to make every store identical, right? We're not trying to say that the culture and the experience that every single dealership has to be, sterile, or there's no personality. But what does matter is that you're able to understand some of the gaps in the process, in the operational success of the dealerships, because with that measurement comes the ability to train, improve, and develop your people and your business.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head with yes, most groups have different rooftops, right? Different brands that they're representing. So as much as you can replicate a successful deployment and a successful talk track or customer experience, scale that, right? Not every rooftop's the same, not every brand's the same, but just the repetition and keeping it, with that customer experience coming first, it all falls into place, right? And having a partner like GoTo to really come alongside, and one source being able to come alongside and have those, really partners in that experience, right, is key. We've seen successful deployments, and really the first impression of a deployment to the C-suite, to the managers of your sales team and service team. There's nothing worse than disrupting their days and changing their day to day, right? How do we make that seamless for them, right? How do we still keep them working in their applications that they're using today, by integrating the GoTo platform and doing things that don't change that day to day, right?
Yeah, I think, and that's exactly right, Blake. I would, reiterate exactly what you just said, and then I would also just add, if we're not making it easy for our customers to work with, or excuse me, let me try that one more time. If we're not making it easy for our employees to work with our customers,
Mm-hmm.
and make that technology experience exceptional, uh, that's going to trickle down to the customer, right? It starts with the employee and giving that employee uh, really seamless advantages over maybe the last dealership that they worked with, right? And how are we empowering our people to be their best self, and to add personality, because they're not thinking about pulling up a customer record, because they're not thinking about, oh, I have to log this phone call manually. They don't have these different things, so they can really focus all their time and energy on making sure that this person that's in front of me feels understood, and like they're the most important person in the room.
Yeah. Yeah, and really, after going through all that, we're going to hit something that everybody, you feel like, is talking about these days, and of course we were going to go through this topic of conversation at some point, but AI, right? So, anyone in a business sense, in an industry, any industry is thinking, how can I implement AI to make my business more efficient, communications more efficient, all the above, right? So, how is AI genuinely moving the needle for dealership communications right now versus just being hype, right? Oh, sure, we can have this, this AI lay on, right? So, how are we? Or I should say, give real world examples as to how that's affecting dealerships and improving their communications.
Yeah. So, I mean, AI, I'll start by saying AI has completely transformed the industry, right? And there's a reason why it's kind of, beating a dead horse at this point is talking about AI. And that's because it really is necessary to
Mm-hmm.
compete in today's day and age. There's so many efficiency gains that can be realized as a result of using AI throughout your operations. But I think at the same time, one of the biggest misconceptions in the dealership world right now is that AI can replace your people, right? That's not been our experience. Our experience has been, the best AI is the AI that works with your people, not against them, right? We're
Mm-hmm.
not asking customers to work with an AI agent that's conversational if they don't want to. That's not their preference, right? So we need a system that's going to provide options, that gives the customer the ability to choose, because ultimately that's what's going to close more deals. Customers love feeling like they're the buyer, not being sold to, right? So when the buyer has a choice, when the customer has a choice in who they work with, how they work, in the channels that they work, you're just going to see more transactions and higher ticket values across sales and service. But I mean, in terms of kind of how we're seeing our customers utilize AI effectively, um, summarizing conversations is huge, right? So again, traditionally, this information has been a big black box to dealerships. They have not been able to understand. The last time that Blake called in to talk to our dealership, he was looking for an F-150, but he wanted a blue F-150, right? And the blue F-150 wasn't in stock. And it's an important metric. That's a key data point that we haven't traditionally had access to track. So the next time Blake calls in, it's, hey, Blake, oh, how do I spell your name? Let's see. Oh, okay, yeah. Is it BLA? CK,
Yeah.
right? Or something like that, right? It's kind of a fragmented experience, let alone, we're not tracking those key metrics and those data points that allow us to sell more vehicles. So by using AI to track what's happening on these phone calls to turn more fence sitters into more qualified buyers is really a big needle mover, right? In terms of what we're seeing today. And then, of course, the 24/7 appointment scheduling experience, the way that dealerships are monetizing their sleep. You're not going to have people sitting in desks on the phone 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can have technology that's there and available when the customer needs them. So utilizing, technology that allows that customer to cross a task off of their list when it's convenient for them and on their timeline is also, really a must-have, right? It's something that we're very much seeing as a way that dealerships need to stay relevant when it comes to keeping fixed ops, alive and well.
Some customers get their best idea to buy an F-150 at 8 o'clock at night, right?
That's right. Absolutely.
No, and really, just to kind of wrap this up and bring it home, I think, as we've talked through communications as a whole, right, the integrations that go into each rooftop and auto dealership group to, all these different applications that they're running. How can we consolidate texting, omni-channel communication to scheduling, all these different things that we can combine into one major or one single pane of glass? What is the most common things that dealerships get wrong when they're modernizing their technology stacks specifically, and where should IT leaders focus?
Yeah, I think it's a great way to kind of bring things home. I think that the biggest mistake is kind of treating communications as a standalone project, right? It's no secret especially as we've gone through this conversation today, communications touches every single department and every customer interaction. So, if you're evaluating a new communications platform, don't just ask kind of the feature sets that it has, right? Ask how it's integrating with your existing ecosystem, because that's more important than ever, is reducing and eliminating data silos across that customer experience, so that you can understand what the true buying experience is across all of the technology that you're implementing. And then for IT leaders specifically, I'd focus on kind of three key things, right? And that is number one, integration. For the reasons that we just mentioned, it's
Mm-hmm.
so important today to have that cohesive experience, for leadership of the dealership to understand the data, for employees to make it easy for them to interact with customers and deliver that compelling customer experience, and for the customer to be the recipient of that investment, to, again, increase convenience, increase average sales price, and margins in the dealership. Second is simplicity, right? So how simple is the system to use, and do you have access to it? I think that's such an important part. We talked about how the automotive industry is so nimble, it's changing so rapidly. So you need that simplicity to be able to empower users and employees to use what's new and deliver that compelling customer experience. And then lastly is scalability, right? So for dealership operators, right, it almost never ends with just one rooftop. So are you setting yourself up for success as you think about scaling and growing the business? How does the technology that we're evaluating today translate to 1, 5, 10, 20 different rooftops? So I'd say those are kind of the three key criteria that are the lens we kind of look at this through. But kind of bottom line is, right, the best communications platform, they don't just improve the conversations, they improve the entire dealership operation.
For sure. And like you said, with that comes integrations, with that comes texting the clients, with that comes communications, all of this encompassing. I've seen it firsthand where dealerships have tremendously benefited, right, from this transition and been able to consolidate. So not only does it look good to the C-suite from a financial perspective, to the end user of a ease of use of experience where you can still go out on the lot and answer your phone, to the integrations where you're not changing the day to day, the benefits go on and on. Well, I think that's a perfect way to wrap that up and into the GoTo experience itself. But David, we really appreciate your time today, and I didn't know if there was anything you wanted to end on or wrap up, but we really appreciate
Yeah.
your time.
No, likewise, Blake. It's been a great conversation. I think just if there's one last thing that I've kind of leave everyone with, it's dealerships are not losing customers today because they lack technology, right?
Mm-hmm.
What we're finding is they're losing customers because the technology that they have is not allowing them to communicate effectively and making it simple. So as we build our product and think about the next decade, right? We think that the dealerships that win are going to be the ones that, not don't necessarily have the biggest marketing budget, the most rooftops, access to the most brands. It's going to be the dealerships that make it effortless for customers to engage with them at every stage of the journey in the way that that customer wants, in the place that they want, and at the time that they want.
Perfect. Well, like I said, David, we appreciate your time. Everyone, thanks for joining and tuning in. We look forward to communicating with you in the future.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Blake.
Take care.